Hi, my name is Liz Krajewski, and this is the Week 5 assignment. And for this assignment, we'll be looking at data for medical practice where it looks like they did some sort of patient survey, asked a patient 6 different questions, and we'll be looking at the results of the data that came in for that survey. So first thing I did in looking at this data is I went and looked at all of the data just to look for any obvious anomalies or anything that looked kind of weird in the data, and nothing really jumped out at me except there were a few blank values, but I left them in because they seemed statistically insignificant. And I also noted that there is some data included in here for 2020, and the assignment only asks us to look for the years 2018 and 2019. So you'll see as we get into the Tableau visualizations that there's filters applied to remove year 2020. So let's go back to the use case. And so for this data set, we're going to assume that it's going to be both clinical and business users of a certain medical practice. They're going to be evaluating the data of a patient survey to determine how their 9 clinics are performing across 6 key areas. As they're looking at this data, they're going to want to look for examples of best practices by seeking out those clinics and providers who are really exceeding in these measures. And they're going to want to take that information so that they can analyze the best practices implemented by those departments and by those providers so that they can then apply those best practices to departments and clinicians who are underperforming. So for each measure, we'll look for clinics and clinicians who are exceeding the national average and clinics and clinicians who are falling below the national average. So let's go ahead and take a look at the visualizations. So the first thing I like to do when I look at data is I like to look at the big picture. So looking across this big picture, you can see that here's the 6 key questions that the patients were asked. The blue bars represent the scores that this practice received, and then the red squares represent the national average. So you can see they're doing pretty well in most areas, well, in about half of the areas, and then they're falling either far below or slightly below the national average in 3 areas. So digging down into, or drilling down to the next level, let's look at the departments. So we'll start with the positives and look at departments that are exceeding the national benchmark. So again, here's our 5 key measures, and here's the departments. And we have it sorted, since it's exceeding, we'll sort it by descending so we can see here's the practices that are really exceeding in this area of care coordination or courteous and helpful staff, and you can see by how much they're exceeding. So here's the national average. Here's what this department scored. So we can see that these are really those departments that are doing well in these various measures. And then we can drill down to the provider level and also see providers that are really exceeding in various measures. So we have it sorted against each measure, the provider score, and you can see how far they vary from the national average. And then looking at the inverse of this, those providers and departments that need some improvement, we will start with the departments and departments that are falling below the national average. So you can see here, this time we're sorting by ascending values so that we can see this is the department that really needs the most help in the courteous and helpful staff area. And then this department, even though they're below, they're not that far below, so still doing pretty well. So really they can focus their resources, in these departments that are falling way below. And again, the same for the providers. You can see here Barbara McClintock is really falling almost a full percentage and a half point below the national average in care coordination, and we can look at that across the various measures. So going back to our use case, recognizing that while this practice wants to see some improvement, they have limited dollars to spend. So they really want to understand how the scores of their medical practice compare to the national average, because if the scores are meeting or exceeding the national average, they probably won't invest too much money to improve that. They really want to focus in those areas where they're falling below the national average. So let's take a look at that visualization. For this item, we did a box and whiskers chart. And again, the red is where is the national average, and then the box and whisker shows the range of scores for each of these areas. And you can see for care coordination, they're really exceeding the national average. Also for getting timely appointments, they're really exceeding the national average. So there's no point in putting a lot of effort in trying to improve these measures because they're doing pretty well. For courteous and helpful staff, they're pretty much right at the national average. Some of their practices are slightly below and some are slightly above, but they're really right in line. And then for provider communication and recommending the provider, and the rating of the provider, there's some opportunity for improvement here. So these are the areas where they'll want to focus their improvement efforts as they seek to improve these measures. And then lastly, going back to the use case, this practice is looking to increase revenue, so they want to know which type of clinicians they should hire by looking to see which type of clinicians are in the highest demand. So we're going to take a look at that particular measure, getting timely care and appointments, to show the credentialing type that's not meeting the national average. So just moving over here. So interestingly, while when we look at the big picture, the getting timely appointments was the lowest score for this medical practice. They were blowing it out of the water in terms of the national average. It looks like nationally, patients find it very difficult to get timely appointments with their providers. So this practice is really doing very well, even though it is their lowest score. But they still clearly believe that there's an opportunity to increase revenue since their patients are having such a hard time getting timely appointments. So let's take a look at the type of credentialing that they should seek to fill. And there's not a huge difference here, but it looks like doctors of osteo doctors are in the greatest demand here. So they had the lowest score, so they might be able to fill some more appointments by hiring an osteopathic physician to try to fill in some extra vacancies and increase their revenue. So overall, these visualizations should help the business and clinical users look to where they can best apply process and practice improvements to increase their patient satisfaction and improve their revenue. Thank you.